competing priorities after this. Let me welcome the two members who are here, the Auditor General and her staff, and I'll ask you to introduce your staff. We also have two researchers who are employed to Parliament, Stephanie Hamilton and Angelica Pattison, who do research on behalf of the committees of Parliament. But Auditor General, could you introduce yourself and your members who are here?
If I may, the officials from Ministry of Finance are also here.
Oh, my apologies. I do apologize. I thought everybody was here from the Auditor General's department, but let me welcome the members from the Ministry of Finance, and again, I will ask you to introduce yourselves appropriately.
Thank you, Chairman, and welcome all. A pleasant good morning. This morning, I'm supported by members of my Corporate Service Department and my DAGs for Audit Assurance and Economic Assessment Unit and Performance Audit. To my immediate left...
Want to tell us what DAG means?
Oh, I'm sorry. Deputy Auditor General.
Chairman, I think the lingo that the AG, you know, wamp dog.
What was that?
The new lingo. I'm a virgin wamp dog.
Okay. Yes. Yes, so to my immediate left is Miss Nakara Stewart. She is Acting Audit Principal for Financial Statements Unit, and she's one of the presenters today. To her left is Miss Kalisha Salmon, who is Acting Audit Principal for Information Technology and is the other presenter for today. Immediately behind me is Carolyn Lewis, Deputy Auditor General for Assurance Audit. But to her left is Mrs. Gail Lou Lim, Deputy Auditor General for Economic Assessment and Performance Audit. And beside her is Siobhan Drysdale from the Corporate Services Unit, and she's also supported by Luigi McDonald, my apologies, Luigi, our Communications Officer. To the left of Kalisha is Marlon Macadam, Deputy Auditor General for Assurance Unit, and I think that rounds out my team. Thank you.
I'm very happy that there are men who are working in the Auditor General's department. I thought it was just dominated by women, so I'm happy that there are two men who work in the Auditor General's department.
And I'm sure it's far more balanced than what here.
Can I ask the Ministry of Finance to introduce yourselves?
Good morning. I'm Hope Blake, Deputy Financial Secretary with responsibility for financial management policy. And beside me is Yvette Brown, and she has responsibility for the unit that deals with the Financial Administration and Audit Act and instructions.
And the it's Stephanie and Angelica who are behind? Okay, all right, welcome. Let me say at the outset that the central theme of my stewardship as chairman of this committee will be accountability and the public's right to know how their taxpayer dollars are spent. Many of the members will be serving on the Public Accounts Committee for the very first time, and I want to remind us all of what our primary responsibility is, which is to focus on the control and protection of the public purse and the manner in which public funds have been used in the implementation of agreed policies. We are serving in very serious times when the world is fighting a pandemic and the economic fallout, particularly for developing countries like ours, and it is significant and ongoing. We have already seen a contraction in various sectors, and we are well aware that the public resources are under pressure. Our job is vital to the diligence and accountability in governance. While we are all here first representing specific constituencies and from political parties, it is important that we approach the work of the committee in a bipartisan way. we should always have at the forefront of our minds that our primary focus should be the protection of taxpayers' dollars and approach the deliberations from that perspective. I can assure you that this will be my approach, and I will ensure that the integrity of the committee is preserved during our deliberations. Jamaica is depending on us to perform our duty from a position of truth, fairness, and respect, regardless of the issues that are before us. What are the main responsibilities or tasks of our Public Accounts Committee? One, to review reports of the Auditor General and or any other reports or matters that have been referred to this committee. Secondly, to review the findings of their deliberations and draw our own conclusions based on the evidence gathered. Third, to make distinct recommendations for corrective actions to be taken by ministries, agencies, and departments. Fourth, to report our findings, conclusions, and recommendations to the House. And fifth, to follow up on the implementation of the recommendations made by the committee. And in this regard, we can call on MDAs to reappear before the PAC. So those are my opening remarks, and I will now move into procedural matters. Now, when the Parliament was dissolved on, would it be September 3rd or August 11th? August 11th. There were a number of matters which were before the PAC, and there is a handout which shows a list of the matters that would have been examined prior to dissolution, and then the matters that would have been tabled after dissolution. One of the matters that was being considered prior to dissolution was the Auditor General's special audit report on the Caribbean Maritime University. I'm going to make a recommendation about how I believe we should proceed going forward in terms of looking at the reports that would have been tabled before dissolution and the others which have been tabled since. In the case of the Caribbean Maritime University, it's not my intention to reopen that issue, primarily because this committee has spent quite a bit of time examining the issue, and there has also been a criminal probe which is underway with regard to this issue. So I don't intend to reopen the Caribbean Maritime University issue. But there are some other issues that I want to recommend that the committee treats with, and I'm going to give what I would consider in order of priority. After dissolution, the Auditor General's performance audit on the Heart Trust NTA, which was tabled on September 29th, and I'm going to propose that we begin in the new year by examining that report. The Heart Trust is one of the largest public bodies, revenues somewhere around $15 billion, very critical to national growth and development in terms of fulfilling its mandate as our national training agency, and I believe it is an agency that requires our urgent review. So the Heart Trust NTA would be the first entity that I would recommend that we review. The second one would be the Jamaica Urban Transit Corporation. And again, based on how important this institution is to public transportation, moving persons around, which has a direct impact on our productivity, I believe it's an entity that we need to review. And then third, the compendium reports of performance audits of the management systems for farm and parochial roads as the third report that we would look at. Now, I've only listed the first three. There are many others, but I know those three will take us quite a bit of time early in the new year. But I'm putting to the committee that recommendation that we treat in the new year those reports in that order, and I'm asking for the committee's approval so we can proceed in that manner.
Chairman, I think for those members who might not know, there are two committee members here whose names have not basically been identified, and two others have joined us. So I think we should introduce ourselves as well.
Oh, my apologies.
I'm Maurice Guy.
from Central St. Mary.
Philip Henriquez from Clarendon, Northwestern.
Morning, everyone. I'm Robert Miller from Southeast St. Catherine.
I'm Dwight Siblis, Clarendon Northern.
Okay, thank you and welcome, members.
Chairman, I'm one of those members who sat on the last, the PAC of the last Parliament, and I agree with you in essence that as it relates to the Caribbean Maritime University, although there are some, might be some lingering questions, but I think substantially we have covered all that as the committee could cover, and you did point out that there are matters before the court, and we are always mindful of it in the discussions that we had during the committee, that we did not encroach on those matters that were before the court. The suggestions you have made, I do not have a challenge. In fact, I would agree with you. I think the Hard Trust NTA being a major spender of government funding, and if the AG has found that there might be issues there, then it is incumbent on the PAC, having been brought to the attention of the Parliament and tabled and referred to the PAC, that should be one of the first things that we do for this year, and then the others will follow.
Let me just to bring the two new members who walked in up to date. We are on item number 5, and I indicated that there are some matters, and in your folder you will see a list of the reports which were tabled prior to dissolution and the ones that have been tabled since dissolution. And the proposal I've made just prior to you coming in is that we treat with first in the new year with the Hard Trust NTA, then the Jamaica Urban Transit Corporation, and then the Ministry of Local Government, the farm and parochial roads. So those 3 in order in the new year, and then we can come back to the other reports. I indicated again prior to you coming in that the Caribbean Maritime University, we don't intend to revisit that matter because there were a number of sit-ins related to that matter, and it's also before the criminal court. So I'm putting to the committee that we proceed in that order and ask for your approval of that recommendation. Those in favor? Any against? Okay, the ayes have it.
Chairman, sorry, can I just ask, those are the 3 areas that you want to deal with first?
First, but there are going to be others because there, as you can see, there's a long list.
Correct.
But you'll imagine that for each of these reports, particularly the first 3, they're going to take quite a few sit-ins for us to go through all of them. So I think, during January, early February, then I think we can look at how we treat in priority of the others. But I would start with those 3.
Okay, I just wanted that for some clarity, just for the members that weren't here at the beginning. That's the first thing we're going to start with, and then we'll have set a further agenda.
Because we have to go through all of these.
Right, we'll set a further agenda.
After that, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chairman.
Sir Chair, if I may, is there any criteria or reasons why these 3 were selected?
Sure. Just before you came in, I indicated that the Hard Trust NTA is one of our largest public institutions. It collects 3% tax from employers. The revenues of the institution are about $15 billion. And in terms of its role in national development as our national training agency, it plays a critical role. And I believe in order of priority, I would regard it as one of the most important public entities. For JUTC, again, in terms of public transportation, particularly in the KMR region, it has a direct impact on productivity in many respects, and I believe it's an entity that is always challenged because I don't think it ever fully recovers the economic cost of delivering the service, but it is critically important to, again, national development and growth. And then the third one would relate to the performance audit of the management systems for farm and parochial roads, which falls under the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development. So my recommendation is based on size and impact of these entities on national development.
Chair, if I may, to follow up on the discussion, which it would mean, therefore, those audit reports would be circulated to us. Is it those matters came because the Auditor General had done some reports on these entities?
Yeah, so all of these matters are already tabled. I'll ask the Auditor General to, there are times the Auditor General will do a special audit based on circumstances. There are other times there are routine audits, but I'll ask the Auditor General to respond to. You heard the question he asked?
Yes, Chair. And before I respond directly to that question, I just want to, just for clarification, that the compendium report is a compendium of the reports for the St. Catherine Municipal Council, the Kingston and St. Andrew Municipal Council, and the RADA. Now, recall that RADA, that report was brought before the committee and discussed. St. Catherine Municipal Council was tabled in July, and KCC, I believe, a week or so ago. No, a compendium was issued because the audit was actually planned as a cross-cutting audit, one topic, 3 entities. The entities did not respond at the same pace, and so the reports were separated. The compendium really aims to show the common issues among the 3 agencies as it relates to the management of parochial roads. So in reviewing that compendium report, then we would be reviewing, in essence, KCC, the report for KCC, and St. Catherine, correct. Now, as it pertains to the other matters, if you look at the document that was circulated this morning, you will see that in the remarks column to the left, the notations, matters to be kept in view. What this means is that we would have done a follow-up of the matters brought before the committee by way of the report. And our follow-up would indicate that the ministry, agency, or department has taken substantive steps to address the issues. So for matters that are to be kept in view, the recommendation is that the committee would not have to review these issues at this time, concerning the fact that there is quite a bit on the plate. Now, there are also others in relation to the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, where the reports are quite dated, meaning that they were submitted to Parliament, say, 3 to 4 years ago. The recommendation is that we would do a follow-up audit rather than bringing those issues which we consider to be dated to the Public Accounts Committee for discussion, is to do a follow-up audit of these issues and issue a more current report where we can speak to what the current circumstances are. So having said that, you will
just one second. So
sure.
If we, just to follow from the Auditor General, so we would not go back to any other items on page 1 of the handout, and neither would we go back to, on page 2, Ministry of Health and MSET.
Right, that's my recommendation.
That's your recommendation.
Okay.
So we can cross, in essence, cross those off our list of ones that we need to review. Okay. Go ahead.
And so what would remain are the reports that you referred to earlier, which would have been tabled this year, with the exception of CMU. And you have indicated, you have proffered your opinion on CMU and how to move forward with that. So I guess in essence, my response...
Can I just ask? So
sure.
Would the, on page 2, Ministry of Local Government, the management systems and maintenance of parochial roads, St. Catherine Municipal Corporation, is that part of the compendium report as well?
Correct.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
Chairman, AG, can you enlighten us as to why, say for example, the AG's report on for the period ending March 31st, 2017, on the National Council on Drug Abuse Pharmacy Council of Jamaica and Bellevue hospitals would not necessarily be discussed? Is it that subsequent to this tabling that any recommendations that were made by the AG in those reports have been addressed, and that you are satisfied now that the accounting for these particular agencies have been settled in the proper way?
So if I'm to understand the first part of your question, is that why did you ask why they were not discussed?
Why is it that you do not think it is prudent for us to go
fine.
back?
So my follow-up. So usually after a report is tabled and in preparation for the Public Accounts Committee, you know, it is a standard procedure that we revisit the entity and examine their responses and the actions taken to address the issues. And if it is that we believe that substantive issues have been taken to address the issues, and a recommendation will be made to the PAC in that regard, to say, well, what we will do is to keep it in view to see the extent to which the measures taken are effective. So my response to Member Sybil's question is that it's only reports that are submitted to the Parliament and tabled by the Speaker of the House that are considered here.
AG, thanks for answering the question, but I'm aware that the report would have come to the House, but because the chairman had mentioned 3 agencies, I was asking if those reports would be furnished to us.
They've been tabled already.
They've been tabled.
In the emails that are sent out, there is a link to go to a Google Drive. We may want to just do it generally as an orientation, because you kind of have to go through a little maze to find them. But there is a link to a Google Drive that is normally sent out with the parliamentary agenda. And when you go on the google Drive, no? No, I know, but even before that, once the Auditor General has submitted the report to Parliament and it's tabled here in Parliament, it's available both on the parliamentary website and on the Google Drive that is normally sent in an attachment. So all of these reports that are here would already have been tabled and would be available for all of us to view. But what the committee clerk is indicating is that once she sends out a notice of a meeting, she attaches the report so that persons can be familiar with them. But all of these reports are already tabled and available.
Thank you, Chair.
Well, let me, to follow up on Member Henriquez's question, we could just decide on by process of elimination, we only left with the Auditor General reports on the CARE program, so we could treat that as the number 4. So if we go through the list, we would start with Heart Trust, JUTC would be second, third would be the compendium reports, and then we would go to the COVID allocation report, which would be number 4. What we also have to remember as well, and I'm not asking or preempting the Auditor General, is that from time to time additional reports may be tabled, which might require our urgent review and attention. So while we have made this recommendation and we're going to proceed this way, we have to bear that in mind as well. Member Clark, trip from Mobile was long. So we're going to proceed with Heart Trust, JUTC, the compendium on the farm roads, and then the CARE program. Any questions on that, members, before I turn it over to the AG's department to do the orientation? Okay, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Now, usually when a new Public Accounts Committee is formed, I request that an orientation session be held, and it's not the best term. It's more of a sensitization and awareness session. And my reason for doing so is so that the members can have a full understanding of the role of the department and how we execute our work. And that's important because despite the constitutional mandate and protection of the Auditor General, the AG, and by extension the department, is reliant on organs such as the Public Accounts Committee to bring some level of effectiveness to the work. There is really no sense in, and I'm sure some among us would understand as an auditor, to plan and execute your work in a manner without any substantive action being taken based on the findings of the audit exercise. And so it's really critical that there is that understanding of why the Auditor General undertakes the work that is undertaken, with the mandate that supports that, and the different audit streams that we actually undertake. So today, the presentation will be led by two members of the department who I introduced earlier, Ms. Nikara Stewart and Kelisha Salmon, and I'll allow them to introduce themselves. But I would like to say that these two young ladies beside me, Mr. Chairman, I selected them deliberately because they both are participants in ASSI Young Leader, which is a Supreme Audit Institution, which is the generic name for an Auditor General's Department, Global Young Leader Program. And so they are 1 year and some months in that program, and I think the program is just about complete. So I would say that this is a part of their grooming and development as young leaders. So without further ado, I will hand over to them.
Thank you, AG, Chairman of the PAC, members of the PAC, other representatives, good morning. Sorry.
Sir Chair, is it fair to say that the AG is only grooming females for the top positions?
No, you came late. The two gentlemen are also members of the AG's department. I noticed the same thing. And
Okay.
Let me quickly add, Mr. Chairman, that there is another Deputy Auditor General, Owen McKnight. He's just not here with us this morning. So it's actually balanced.
It's no problem with me, Madam AG. It's no problem whatsoever. But absolutely my colleague.
We sorted out the technical issues.
Okay, the slideshow just needs to start, but I will go ahead in the interest of time. So this morning, we're here to do, as the AG had indicated, orientation session, discussion session just to give further information on the duties of the department and the role we'll play. The speakers for today, I'm Nikaria Stewart, Principal Auditor Acting for the Financial Statements Unit. With me is Kalisha Salmon. She's Principal Auditor Acting for Information Technology. For today's discussion, we'll be looking at the instruments of parliamentary control, the AG's mandate, the types of audits that we conduct, the audit process that we go through, and we'll look ahead on what is to come. And at the end, we'll have a session for question and answers. Narendra Modi, who is the Prime Minister for India, has a quote that says, "Good governance depends on the ability to take responsibility," and that's both by the administration as well as the people. With this, the AUGD is committed to improving its audit products to positively impact and influence public financial management and governance practices of the MDAs. And MDAs means ministries, departments, and agencies. This commitment is intertwined with our responsibility to contribute to the GOJ's efforts to achieve its National Development Plan, Vision 2030, and United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. And it is with this commitment that we also embarked on our journey to ISO certification, ISO 9001-2015 certification in September 2018. This took us on a 2-year journey, and I'm happy to say that we were conferred on November 23rd, 2020, with our certificate of conformity by the National Certification Body of Jamaica. And this covers our core audit services, corporate services division, quality assurance, and internal audit units. And of course, the official ceremony will be held on Thursday, December 17. But this is a copy of a certificate that we received. Would have been on screen earlier. The main instruments of parliamentary control are the Consolidated Fund, the Auditor General, and the Ministry of Finance. The Consolidated Fund is the principal government account to which all government revenues must be deposited and from which expenditures via warrants are withdrawn. The Minister of Finance, he develops all the rules, policies, and procedures that governs funds leaving the Consol Fund, as well as the use of funds by the MDAs. The Minister of Finance is also responsible for the internal audit of the GOJ service. The Auditor General, on the other hand, we are the external auditors, and we review expenditure and revenue from the Consol Fund and ascertain whether transactions have been carried out in accordance with the regulations and the laws established by the Minister of Finance. Another element of control is the Public Accounts Committee. And it is said that leaders are accountable for accountability. And this is why parliamentary oversight is important. Oversight committees are key to effective government. Effective PACs hold entities accountable for A, correcting deficiencies, B, implementing recommendations from the AG, and C, executing policies and programs in accordance with the legislature's intentions. Our mandate comes from sections 120 to 122 of the Jamaica Constitution Order in Council Act, July 23, 1962, and sections 25 to 32 of the Financial Administration Audit Act 2011. Our vision is a better country through effective audit scrutiny. And our mission is to conduct and make public high-quality audits and produce recommendations that are relevant to the auditees, the Parliament, and the citizens. Our quality policy that governs how we work daily. We are committed to producing high quality, independent quality assurance and performance audit reports of public sector entities and economic assessment of government's fiscal policy papers. And these are consistent with legislative requirements and international auditing standards. The AUGD is committed to continual improvement in meeting or exceeding customer expectations through a highly efficient, motivated, diverse, and performance-driven team. As we look to support the GOJ and the PAC, what the AUGD has done is to ensure that our strategic objectives and quality objectives are aligned with the National Development Plan, the national outcome, and the goals from the Vision 2030 and the SDGs. So we have focused on National Outcome 6, which speaks to effective governance, in particular to strengthening accountability and transparency mechanisms. We have linked to Goal 2, that speaks to the Jamaican society is secure, cohesive, and just, and promoting peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, and building effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. Our strategic objectives look to improve public sector financial management and governance, and to maximize the impact of our audit products by reflecting emerging risks and stakeholder concerns in the planning of our audit work, and by improved communication of our audit results. Our quality objectives are to consistently provide quality audit services that meet regulatory requirements and customer satisfaction. The AUGD is committed to lead by example and thereby adheres to the requirements of the FAA Act. We also adopt and consistently apply standards promulgated by the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions, INTERSI. With this in mind and our resource allocation, what we have done is to prepare a rolling quality risk-based 3-year strategic plan, which is important as we're unable to execute all audits based on the many MDAs. So annually, we're unable to execute all audits for all the MBAs. So what we have done is to create a 3-year strategic plan that will see us reviewing what we consider to be higher risk agencies and MDAs during that time. We have looked at extending to 3 to 5 years to ensure during that time we would have at least reviewed the MDAs at least once. The AG's department does not have the resources, as I said before, so we do a risk-based approach while remaining responsive to the concerns of the stakeholders. Whilst we do prioritize, though, based on risk, we also consider budget allocation to the MDAs and the social impact. As we know, government is rules-based, and every action that the AUGD takes is governed by the respective law, acts, policies, and procedures. We do not make the rules, and our reports identify departures from or compliance with existing legislations and regulations. I will now hand over to my colleague Kelly Shaw, who will take us through the types of audit that we conduct and the audit process. Thank you. Kelly Shaw.
Thank you, Nicaria. Mr. Chairman, members of the PAC, other representatives, good morning. Now, as Nicaria said, I will be taking this opportunity to walk you through our audit process, just to give you an insight into how our audit products are conducted. Now, the audit process adopted by the Auditor General's Department for all our audit streams support the Auditor General in delivering high-quality audit reports that are in keeping with the applicable standards and guiding principles. The different types of audits that we conduct, I will take you through them. We start off with the performance audit. This is an independent, objective, and reliable examination of whether government undertakings, operations, programs, activities are operating in accordance with the principles of economy, efficiency, and effectiveness, and whether there is room for improvement. Our Special Investigations Unit conducts special investigations at the direction of the Auditor General, and these will take into account any internal assessments as well as concerns raised by members of the public. And these types of special investigations may take the form of any of the audit streams that we conduct. As it relates to our financial or assurance audits, these are examinations of our financial statements that are produced by the executive agencies, municipal corporate authorities, statutory bodies, as well as the appropriation accounts of MDAs. This type of audit is also supported by our compliance audit, and it primarily focuses on determining whether the financial information is presented in accordance with the applicable financial reporting and regulatory framework. In addition to those audits, we conduct compliance audits, and this is an assessment of whether the activities and the financial transactions of the MDA comply in all material aspects with the authorities that govern the audited entity. And for these authorities, we specifically look at the acts, the regulations, any specific instructions, the circulars that are issued from time to time by the Ministry of Finance, etc. For our IT audits, this is an examination and review of IT systems and the related controls to gain assurance or identify violations of the principles of legality, efficiency, economy, effectiveness of the IT system within the environment of the MDA. We also consider whether the funds spent by the entity on the acquisition and development of various information systems have realized their objectives. The other unit, we have the Economic Assessment Unit, and they are particularly concerned with reviewing the fiscal policy paper as required under Section 48B, Section 6 of the FAA Act. It is concerned with examining whether the components of the fiscal policy paper and the monitoring of the assumptions and targets detailed in the FPP presented in Parliament by the Minister of Finance is in keeping with the applicable guidelines. This particular unit also conducts financial performance analysis of select public bodies as well as special performance audits. I will now move into the audit process. Thank you. Now, our audit process begins with the topic selection. Now, in determining the topics for audit, the AUGD obtains information from various sources to conduct a preliminary survey of the entity, and in so doing conducts a risk assessment to determine the area of focus. And this is also the start of our stakeholder engagement, and I'll elaborate. Now, the information that we will obtain for a specific entity will be information that resides within the MDA from external stakeholders, Parliament, as well as within the AUGD's office, as well as other audit and inspection bodies. And I will give you examples of the different types of information that we collect. So from the MDAs, we will look at their annual reports and their business plans. We will take a look at their performance as compared to the targets. We will review their financial statements, as well as and if not available, their books of accounts, and we will review their information that is also published on their website. From the external stakeholders, we will look at media reports, publications from professional bodies, as well as information from other non-government organizations. From Parliament and the AUGD, within the AUGD, we will look at previous audit reports, and these may be for performance, financial, compliance, economic assessments, and even our special investigation reports. And we will also examine any reports that come from Parliament. We will also consider the work done by internal auditors within the MDA, and in some cases, well, we have some of the MDAs are audited by external auditors, and we will also review their reports as well. Now, what do we do with this information? we try as best as possible to completely understand the nature of the client's business. We identify and assess the risks, and in so doing, we consider the program risk, which is even the risk within the Auditor General's department to deliver on our recommendations and to arrive at a conclusion, and we look at the risk that resides within the entity itself. We then, having considered all the risks, we then consider our audit approach. And our audit approach will generally take three forms. Maybe a system-oriented approach, where we would examine the functioning of the management systems. Example is financial management systems. We may do a result-oriented approach, where we assess whether the outcome or output objectives were achieved as intended, or whether the programs and services are operating as intended. And then we have our problem-oriented approach, which examines, verifies, and analyzes the causes of particular problems or deviations from the criteria. When we have collated all the information from the various sources, it's now time for us to develop our audit plan. Now, I must stress that the planning process is an iterative one. As the process goes on, it can lead to significant revisions in the scope, and as more information is known about the entity. So we will start by setting the scope, designing our audit questions. What is it that we would want to know about the entity? We would define the criteria, and this criteria is the standard by which we will measure the entity against. Maybe there are objectives, there's targets, specific standards by which they are required to abide by, the acts, regulations, circulars, and customer and user expectation. Now, where will we get the evidence that we require? The information, as outlined earlier, will come from the MDA, other public organizations, any public research, as well as customers, suppliers, or any expert groups or focus groups. What question will the evidence answer? Now, in doing so, we have to gather the facts. The facts that we collect can be in the form, they can be numerical, descriptive, or qualitative in nature. How do we get this information? Now, the information is collected either in person by observation, examining the documents that reside within the office of the MDA. We conduct interviews with the management, key staff, and just general staff, and as well as focus groups. Information is also obtained by post, email, or phone, and requesting documentations or even surveys. We consider also our limitations. Are there any significant limitations in the evidence? And in so doing, we will have to determine if there's any other way in which we can supplement the information that we obtain to ensure that it is reliable, to ensure that it is sufficient and appropriate given the nature and scope of the audit. And then in drafting the audit plan, we also consider what the results are likely to tell us. What does the evidence allow us to say about the subject matter that we will be auditing? And does it support our conclusions and our recommendations? Now, throughout this entire process, as Nikaria had mentioned before, we do a continuous risk assessment. So we look at defining the risk, what is the likelihood of the risk occurring, what kind of impact what kind of impact would occur if the risk were to materialize, and who at the entity is responsible for managing that risk. Having done all of this, we now produce a study plan, which is then submitted to the Auditor General for her review and approval. And I must underscore here that the only name and opinion in the any Auditor General's report is that of the Auditor General. Therefore, the scope, the focus of any audit is the Auditor General's decision. As team members, we provide a supportive role to the Auditor General, providing the information that is needed to decide on the proposed audit, to determine whether or not it would be meaningful for us to carry out, having considered the impact, social or otherwise, and whether it is doable based on the resources that we have, given that we do not have infinite resources. Okay, I had mentioned that we have an economic assessment unit, and the information that is obtained from this particular entity is unique in nature. Now, they conduct their assessment of the fiscal policy paper, and I will just walk you through briefly these primary sources of information that they will obtain and from where they will obtain it in order for them to conduct their assessment. So in reviewing the FPP, the information is obtained from the Ministry of Finance. We will look at the fiscal policy. We will look at items such as the tax reform, tax arrears, refund, the macroeconomic assumptions, contingent liabilities, etc. Information is also obtained from the debt management branch, and this is where we will look at the debt strategy, the issuance and borrowing, loans, risk assessments, maturity profile, loan repayments, etc. Information is also obtained from the Bank of Jamaica. This is where we look at the monetary and exchange rate policy, and more specifically, we look at the money supply, interest rates, inflation, losses, securities, external reserves, banking legislation and regulations, as well as any IMF programs that may be ongoing. We obtain information also from the Statistical Institute, and this pertains to external trade statistics, be it of tourism, national income and product, the GDP, outturn, consumer price index, the CPI, labor force, etc. And also from the Planning Institute of Jamaica, we will look at the national income, product, and as well as the connection to Vision 2030, any aid, grants, or policy-based loans. As it relates to our information technology audits, the information is quite similar to that obtained for the other audit streams previously mentioned. However, the focus is more aligned to the IT infrastructure and environment that exists within the specific MDA. We will conduct a risk identification, assessment, and audit planning, and we gather audit evidence, which I will go through in a few, and we will look at the evaluating and testing of the IT controls, reporting, and follow-up. Okay, we're now back at the audit cycle wheel. Now, I've taken you through the planning, I've taken you through developing the audit plan, and now it's time for us to conduct the audit. This is where the fieldwork begins. And I would just like to reiterate that stakeholder engagement as well as quality assurance is embedded right throughout the audit cycle. At this point, the team goes out to the audited entity and will collect the information as documented in the audit plan. And it is possible that when we are on the ground, things may not necessarily reflect or initial, may not reflect the information that we would have determined from our preliminary survey. And I had mentioned to you before that the process is iterative. Thank you. Right? So at any point in time, depending on what is happening on the ground, we have to rescope. We will look at the evidence, determine where the risk lies and where it is that we should be focusing our resources. Now, in conducting the audit, we ensure that the audit team has the professional competence to perform the audit, or else we would be doing a disservice to the entity. So we ensure that there is sound knowledge of auditing, we research design, we consider the investigative and evaluation techniques, as well as the personal strengths, analytical, writing, and communication skills of the audit team. In following data collection and fieldwork, we now move into our analysis and drafting of the report. Now, this is where we review the evidence that has been obtained, and as Nikaria had mentioned before, we do not make the rules. Based on the findings, the auditor would then exercise professional judgment to reach a conclusion. The findings and the conclusions are results of analysis in response to the audit objectives, and they provide answers to the audit questions. Now, I had mentioned to you before that in assessing audit evidence, we look at sufficiency, reliability, and relevance. So for sufficiency, we measure, it's measurable in quantitative or convincing in quality. We need to be able to persuade a reasonable persons that the conclusions and the recommendations are justified and supported, relevant, logical, and sensible in relation to the audit objectives and criteria. So there must be a clear link, right, between what it is that we had set out to do and the objectives and the conclusions that are reflected in the report. We would also note the purpose of conducting the audit, the source, and the scope of our evidence. We ensure that the evidence obtained is reliable, meaning that it must be consistent with facts that are valid and can be validated. It's corroborated by more than one source. It's documentary rather than oral, direct rather than indirect, and we prefer to use original rather than photocopies. Having evaluated the evidence, we now move into the clearance. Now, at this point, we will now produce a draft audit report that we try to ensure is a balanced perspective. We look at ensuring that it is objective, accurate, and it reflects the concerns of the various stakeholders. Now, we provide the opportunity to the audited entity at this time to challenge any findings and the recommendations and any evidence that we have obtained in arriving at our conclusions. And in providing any additional evidence, the audit team may go back into the field to review and assess the information or the supplementary information that has been provided had been provided to the Auditor General. And then we will assess that information and determine, with the support of evidence, whether the audit report needs to be updated, and we make the necessary changes. If the audit entity agrees with the facts, but does not necessarily like how they are presented, then the auditor should consider the merits of the argument, but not necessarily to alter the report. At the end of the day, any alterations must improve accuracy as well as balance. Now, I need to underscore again that the opinion that is expressed in any of our audit reports are that of the Auditor General. In doing so, the independent opinion helps Parliament to hold the MDA to account for the resources that are in their care. If we can improve the accuracy and balance of the report, then it is better for us to achieve accountability. If the report needs to be critical, then it will be. But conversely, the report, as far as it is reflective, also considers any actions that have been taken by government to improve their governance of the entity. Having reviewed the report and following the changes and any updates, the report is then submitted for tabling in the House of Representatives. And once tabled, the report is now a public document and is published then on our website as well as on our social media platforms. And then we conduct a follow-up audit or at the time of the Auditor General producing her annual report, we may do follow-up verification activities to determine whether the recommendations that were put forward, we determine the extent to which they have been addressed, and we will report thereon. I would like to also take this opportunity to highlight that I had mentioned before that the quality assurance is embedded right throughout our audit cycle, but we also have an independent quality assurance unit, and this unit is responsible for ensuring that the quality control systems and the practices within the Auditor General's department are working effectively, and the processes culminate into a quality audit report. They are required to abide by the relevant standards, quality standards, be it ISAI 40 or ISAI 1220. And this unit, they conduct planning, they will conduct their independent review of the reports that we have, the working papers, the report, and they will also do follow-up activities to ensure that the process, the internal process, the audit process, is fully in keeping with the quality standards. Okay. So that is the end of the audit process, and I will now briefly walk you through the next steps for the Auditor General's department. Okay, so the Auditor General mentioned that Nicaria and myself were participants in a Cy Young Leader program. And with this program, we were required to come up with change strategies that would seek to improve the work of the Auditor General's department. And in so doing, Nicaria, her change strategy was about enhancing information security, and my change strategy was geared towards tracking the implementation of our audit recommendations. And I will go now into Nicaria's strategy. So the objective is to enhance the Auditor General's security policies and procedures with the aim of mitigating unauthorized access and or disclosure of confidential information. We're now living in a technology age, and data is what, is king. And so we have to ensure that the information that we have within the Auditor General's department for our MDAs are properly secured. And so we have recognized that if we do not seek to improve our information security systems, then our data will be at risk. I would like to outline that we have approved, or through Nicaria, we were able to have an information security policy, which was approved by the Auditor General, and the policy and the procedures outlined therein will allow the Auditor General and the stakeholder to improve stakeholder relationships, giving our stakeholders greater confidence in the information that they share with us, knowing that the data that they provide is secured. We will also seek to have greater efficiencies in our audit process, leading ultimately to improved review of public funds and meeting the Auditor General's strategic objectives and mandate. Where are we with this policy? Having approved the security policy, the next step is for us to harden our IT infrastructure, our security infrastructure, to ensure that we remain protected against any possibility of security breaches. Okay. So my project was concerned with tracking the implementation of our recommendations. As outlined earlier, you would have seen that follow-up audit is a part of our audit cycle, but there is room for improvement. So for a performance audit, what generally happens is that after a report has been published, we would follow-up activities. In the case of our assurance audits, is a little bit more frequent, usually occur annually because these audits are done on an annual basis. However, in the case of our performance audits, sometimes it may take 3 to 5 years before we conduct a follow-up audit activity. Follow-up normally precedes the if the entity will be called before the PAC or the PAAC. However, if this does not happen, then and if it is that the audit is not necessarily selected for a follow-up audit, then the status of the implementation of the recommendations would be unknown. And so through my project, it is planned that we will be implementing a web-based tracking tool, which is Team Central, that will allow us to more timely track the implementation of the recommendations for the audited entities. The platform will allow us to establish timelines for implementation. It will identify who is the owner of the recommendation, any contributors, any observers, and it will also be able to let us know how far along the process is the MDA with implementing these recommendations. Now, what kind of impact is this project likely to have? Active tracking will help to inform the Auditor General's strategic business plan, as well as help to improve the number of follow-up audits that are to be conducted, as well as aid in the efficient scheduling of our audit resources. Tracking will also enhance the AUGD's risk assessment of MDAs to better justify, scope, and prioritize audit interventions and aid in the refining of the selection of audit topics. The implementation of Team Central will assist Parliament's oversight functions through the Auditor General's tracking and reporting of the MDA's implementation of the recommendation. And it is envisioned that it will also enhance GOJ's governance framework, bolster public sector performance, accountability, transparency, and public confidence. I had prepared a short video. It's not playing. Just to give you an idea of what the platform will operate and how it will operate and function.
We skip over because someone has to be at the machine to play it, and there's no one there.
Okay. So in wrapping up, the platform will be accessible by the internal and external stakeholders. This includes Parliament through the PAC as well as the MDAs. It will provide the MDAs with an interface to upload their responses to our audit findings, along with relevant supporting documentation. It will also facilitate quality control checks and audit verification of uploaded responses before finalized information is shared with external stakeholders, and it will allow for the seamless flow of audit follow-on activities for stakeholder involvement, whereby PAC members will have unfettered access to monitor the implementation of the recommendations made by the committee as well as the Auditor General, which could aid in developing their meeting schedules and work plans. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. I will now open the floor for questions, any questions that you may have.
Members, you have heard the presentations. Are there questions or comments? Member Guy?
One quick question, Chairman. AG, there's always been a problem with government agencies. As members of Parliament, when we send in invoices or so, they always want originals. The presentation, the last presenter a while ago indicated that either original is preferred over photocopy, but it didn't say that one is not accepted. What is the present take on it?
Well, the principle based on the instructions is that the photocopy is not accepted. Unless that photocopy is certified, we need to see the original, because the original ought to be retained by the accounts department.
That is just original then, unless it's a certified.
But are you referring to pro forma versus
invoices?
Yes, because a pro forma is not a photocopy, right? The pro forma is really just an intent. The invoice shows the actual transaction, so we would not rely on a pro forma.
No, I'm not referring to pro forma. Invoices.
Yes.
Because there are instances where, for example, and all members of parliament probably would be familiar with this, you have a death and some benefit is being sought through the office of a member of parliament, but the funeral home gives one invoice and they are asked that if they are NIS beneficiaries.
And one death certificate.
Well, the death certificate is not a problem. We should hope it's one. But they have to send a copy to, or the original to the NIS and other areas that they're seeking assistance from. How do you get around that particular hurdle? Because they're not issuing 3 or 4 or 5 invoices.
What I heard you say just now is that they originally sent to the NIS.
I mean, I'm saying it doesn't matter necessarily NIS, but I mean, they're seeking assistance from 2 or 3 entities, but there's only one original they have.
Well, if that's the case, we would trace it, because we would be told where the original is. If it is that one government entity has a copy, it should be stated there that the original is with the NIS or whichever entity is with.
The issue here is that in most cases, the member of parliament can't fully cover the cost, like in the case of a funeral, so the constituent has to go to multiple sources to try and cover the cost. So the funeral home issues one invoice, which the person comes to you for some assistance, but then has to use the same invoice to get assistance from other sources as well. So that's really what member guy was getting at in terms of how do you treat with that, where you, in many cases, you have to photocopy the original because the funeral home is not going to issue 5 original invoices.
Well, I think my best response to that is that there is one entity that would have the original. So how that original now traverses through the government entities, I think that's another matter. As long as it is that the original is with one government entity, then there should be some record of that, of traceability. Or is it that you are saying, member, that the member of parliament or an entity outside of government wishes to retain the original invoice?
No.
Okay.
I'm only saying that when you take it to an agency, for example, the SDC, which is the implementing agency for most of our constituency development fund, they will not accept the photocopy because they say they want the original, and the auditors want the original. Even when you tell them that the original is, say, by the NIS or wherever it is, or another government agency, the invoice, the recommendation, the assistance will not be processed until they have the original. I'm just seeking a way to find out how do we treat with this particular matter.
I defer to the representative from the Ministry of Finance, who would be in a better position to speak to the rules and
Ms.
how
Blake?
that could be amended.
Ms. Blake, I don't know if you heard the question. Okay.
Chair,
Yes,
before
member,
Ms. Blake answer, I just want to say something to the AG through you, Chair, with regards to that same matter. Madam AG, the issue is that these entities like SDCs, they would honor the request. However, their difficulty is the Auditor General. That is their issue. The Auditor General wants the original invoice, while the original invoice is with the Ministry of Labor in the NIS department. Now, John Doe would like to bury his loved one and is having a difficulty. How do you, as the Auditor General, would you be prepared to think about, because maybe you're not able to give us the answer today, but would you be prepared to think about a way that would satisfy accountability of government funds, bearing in mind the challenges that is before us?
Okay. So two things, Mr. Chairman, and citing the example given by Member Guy, he spoke to the fact that there are a number of entities involved and each entity wants to have an original. Now, that original resides in one particular entity. It is not unusual for members of the Auditor General's department to visit other entities in order to satisfy themselves. So if it is that there is a transaction that we'd like to verify, and it is of a material level where we believe that it requires further tracing, we will visit the entity to see the original. That is one. Second, I want to refer to the statement made by Kelisha in her presentation. The Auditor General does not make the rules. And so I am not going to make any recommendation to change the rules, which is why I defer to the Ministry of Finance. It is the Ministry of Finance who has the authority to change the rules. I simply audit following the criteria established by either the Constitution, the relevant regulation and law or policies, procedures, and circulars stipulated by the Ministry of Finance. I do not set the rules. So I can't make any recommendations to bend those rules.
Or Ms. Blake or the other rep?
Okay. As it relates to how one would treat with the need for multiple originals, so to speak, by various entities, we will begin from the position that generally the original is what is required in terms of processes and the rules that we have. That is what is required in terms of us making particular assessments. However, from time to time, depending on what the circumstances are, it may be that, as the Auditor General had indicated in terms of making particular checks with other entities, that those are methods that can be adopted. But from where we sit, certainly one of the operational activities that could assist in alleviating that circumstance would be having officers at a particularly senior enough level, for example, certifying that they have actually seen the particular original in question, if it is that that said original may be required to be presented to other government entities. Not suggesting it's the only solution that could be advanced. If it is that the situation or the problem that is being experienced is significant enough, it is something that we probably can look at in terms of a more general policy. But in terms of how we operate on a day-to-day basis, the originals generally, yes, they are required. From time to time, there may be circumstances that may cause a need for particular assessments and particular decisions to be taken, as the suggestion that was outlined in terms of certifying those particular documents. But as a general rule, yes, the originals are required, but we are not steadfast in not amending rules or shaping those rules to allow us to execute. And so, as I said, from time to time, there may be changes, or even as we have our financial instructions, depending on situations, there are entities who, not necessarily for invoices, but for other matters, just I'm speaking to a general rule, where they may seek permission to possibly depart from what a particular rule is because of the uniqueness of a particular circumstance that has arisen. Based on what is being outlined, however, it is appearing that this may be a more broader issue. And if it is so, those are things that can always be put to the ministry for the ministry to take a decision in terms of how it amends or adjust a particular rule if it is so desired.
You have a follow-up, Member Siblings?
Yes, Chair. I don't know if it is a follow-up question, but a follow-up comment to say that it is a big problem right across constituencies. And what we are getting is that we cannot assist members of our constituents who is frustrated based on the fact that they have sent the original to a different ministry or a different agency or elsewhere, and those particular agency or ministries is not forwarding back the original invoice, and the agency which we would like the funds to be disbursed from is unable to say that I am certifying that I have seen the original document. So I am saying that maybe it is something that needs to be looked at, being that we have Member Guy has rightfully brought it to their attention as a challenge that we face in the constituency. But, Chair,
what I would say is, if it is that it is a situation that is as widespread as you have outlined based on your own experience and the work that you do, it is appropriate for members to put a proposal together outlining what their situation is, what are the challenges posed, and utilize the appropriate channels so that the matter could be looked at by the ministry to see what are the protocols that could be put in place. From time to time, and I will probably say even during the particular period that we have been having throughout this year, there are circumstances where entities would have written, not necessarily from the political directorate, but within the context of GOJ itself and general administration, where there are some challenges that would have arisen, and they would have outlined those things to us, we would have looked at it, and while still keeping as much as possible to what the particular rules are, and keeping to those rules because of the purpose of those rules to ensure that breaches are not rampant. Persons would nonetheless have outlined their situations. We would have looked at it. There are circumstances where we would have made certain, I would say, exceptions and would have put that in writing. But certainly, if it is that this is a widespread enough issue, I believe that those are things that can be properly put to the ministry for us to have possibly interministerial discussions, because you particularly raised this concern in connection with the Ministry of Labour and Social Security to see how best those things could be addressed.
Well, what I think we'll do is refer this matter to the CDF Committee of Parliament. It is an issue which all members of Parliament face and will continue to face, because the allocations that we have will never ever be sufficient to cover the cost of funerals. So I think it's a matter we can take up at the CDF level, and the CDF can have a discussion with the Ministry of Finance to find a solution to that.
Sir Chair, the ayes have it.
Huh?
The ayes have it.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman,
Yes,
can we
Member
also
Charles.
add that a lot of invoices now in the digital age are electronic, so we really have to figure out what we can do for that, because I print a lot of my invoices. What do I have to do, run down to get it stamped? I just think we need to really look into that, especially with digital. We want to make sure that everything falls in line, but it is a digital age, so we have to figure out something.
Again, I think we can take that up with the CDF committee and see how we can appropriately treat with that matter. Are there any other questions on the presentation, Member Siblings?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the presentation. Madam AG, I have two areas that I like to get some clarification on. The first area is risk assessment. I want you to see if you could explain some more the process which the AG goes through in conducting its risk assessment. Is it one that involves only members of the AG who would identify the risk, having identified the risk, would then assess the risk? Or is it one that involves a broader stakeholder approach where members of the ministry, department, and agencies are involved in identifying risk and assessing the risk in a consensus mode?
Thanks for that question, member. All right, so let me begin by saying that the risk that we're referring to here is the audit risk. So that is a risk determined by the auditor. This does not involve, this is not in any way related to the risk identified by the entity. Entities are required to undertake their own risk assessments. Each entity is required to undertake its own risk assessment. The Auditor General's Department, however, as would have been explained by Nicario, under the Constitution, the Auditor General is required to undertake the audits of all ministries, departments, and agencies at least once per year. That's what the Constitution says, at least once per year. And you recognize the vastness of government. We do not have the resources to undertake the audits of all entities, or even over a 2-year period, which is why we have a 3-year strategic audit rolling plan. Now, this strategic audit rolling plan, which is now going over into its second term, at the development of that plan, for the first time, we had a stakeholder engagement approach. So we invited different stakeholder representatives. We had the chairman, then chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. We had someone from academia. We had someone from civil society. I believe we had invited someone from the media, but we didn't have representation from the media. And we had other government entities involved who we believe would have an interest in the work of the Auditor General's Department insofar as they can rely on the work that we do to further their own mandate. The aim, as you would have alluded to, is to ensure, because the overarching mandate is that whatever we do must be relevant to the citizens. We must be meeting the needs of the citizens, and we can only meet the needs of the citizens if we know what those needs are. Now, there are different ways that we can determine that, but stakeholder engagement is a critical component of that. So for the stakeholder engagement, for the strategic audit plan, what we would have done is to gather persons that we believe represent the various stakeholder groups and to get from each their considered area of focus and why. Why do you believe that the Auditor General's Department should be focusing on this area? Which particular sector? And it is from that we then, having gathered that information, we would have done our own assessment internally. Now, I think about a year or so ago, we had significant emphasis on, or we placed significant attention to health, because health was an area that was actually highlighted by our stakeholders. So stakeholder engagement is very critical to the audit process. And of course, when we go inside, when we know are back at base, we are guided by standards. Nicario mentioned the standards. It's the International Standards for Supreme Audit Institutions. The name has changed. The name has changed recently. But we are bound by these standards in the execution of our work. And that is from the audit planning phase to the publication of the report. So everything that we do, though there is judgment involved, there is a basis for what we do, and those are the international standards. But in addition to that, specifically for the performance audits, we have what is called focus group discussions. That's a very important element of the audit process for the performance audit. Why? Because we recognize that we are not experts in the area. We do not work in the area. We go in with a particular objective. We know what it is that we want to assess, but we want to hear from those who are either affected by the work of the ministry, department, or agency, or generally have an interest in it. So we have focus group sessions for every performance audit, and we're very deliberate with how we do the groupings. So we may have groupings where we have other ministries and representatives from other ministries, departments, and agencies that interact with that particular entity. And whatever is discussed there, it is confidential. That's the assurance that is provided. So there is there's uncensored discussion. We then have discussions probably dependent on the area, either with academia, we may invite someone from civil society, but we also invite members of the general public to participate. It was a very important session. As Kelisha indicated, that oftentimes we go out with one objective, and in the course of the audit, the findings is suggesting that, well, our intended area of focus is not the best area based on the impact and based on the relevance of that specific area. But oftentimes, we have actually changed our performance audit focus because of the focus group sessions, the discussions that we have had with members. I can give you an example of a focus group that led to a report which I considered it was quite an emotional journey for some persons involved, and that is for Department of Correctional Services. We invited persons who were a part of the prison system to share, and we had a gentleman who shared what crime he committed and his journey there and some of the issues that the prisoners face. And we used some of what he shared to inform our report and also to inform the areas that we pay special attention to. So there are a number of issues that we take into consideration, and the audit planning, the risk element of it, is not a one-stop approach. It is continuous throughout the audit.
Thank you, Madam Auditor General. Chair, I don't know if I'm hearing correctly, but is it that the AG is saying that currently the AG department is operating in the breach of the Constitution, not being able to look at all the areas? But I really want to go to my second question, Chair, with your permission.
Well, I don't think you can leave the first one hanging like that. The issue, as the AG has pointed out, is a lack of resources, personnel, to ensure she can complete all the audits during the time frame.
Which is by default. It happened not intentional, but based on the resources. I do understand, Chair. The other question, which the AG alluded to it somewhat, but I want some further clarification, Madam AG. I believe in the second presentation, just said at the beginning of the audit, there is, at stage 2, the auditor has some sort of, there's a preemptive conclusion, and those are my words. And when the auditor goes in the field to conduct the investigation, at times the result is contrary to those preemptive conclusion. Is this method, if I have gotten it correct, a good, reasonable method for the auditor, or is it that the auditor would want to have objectives and then develop the auditor's audit program based on these objectives, and the results show or indicate whatever the investigation reveal?
Okay, thanks, Member Civils. As you would well understand the audit process, all that you have said is true. So nothing that you have said varies from what we do. What Kelisha referred to is the justification when an audit, and it would have been reported that a preliminary survey is done. A justification document is prepared and submitted to me to justify, I don't want to reuse the word, but to justify why it is that we need to look at this area, because as we don't have infinite resources. And so if we're going to look at area A versus B, I must be convinced that there is something meaningful to be achieved from the review of these particular entities. In doing your audit program, Member Civils, you don't want to go net fishing. Yes, you want to go spear fishing, and that's what she's referring to. So when you are planning your audit, you must know what it is what is the conclusion that you want to arrive at. No, that conclusion is not negative or positive. And if the reports, I did not walk with a copy of the reports, but they're available on the website. When you go in the appendix, you will see the questions that we asked and what we want to conclude. So the conclusion is not a negative, but if it is, for example, that and I'm looking at KCMC, I think let me just look at the audit topic here. So the department is the management system of the maintenance of the parochial road. I want to conclude that the St. Catherine Municipal Council or the KCMC Municipal Council, that they have an effective system in place to manage the road projects and activities. So that's the conclusion that she's referring to. Now, when you know what you want, then you will know what you need to do to get there. So having determined that I want to conclude that the system is effective, there are steps and questions that we will have to ask in order to gain that conclusion.
So hold on, members, please, because I know we're going into detail about the methodology for audits, which is a little outside the scope. We may have to take it offline because we're almost at midday in terms of time, and not that the questions aren't valid, but I want to give other members an opportunity if there are other questions that they would like to ask before we move to AOB. Member Guy?
Thank you, Chairman. No, man, I do have a question, and you'll be interested in the question too, or the answer. Okay? Thank you, Chairman.
Go ahead, Member Guy.
AG, in the last presentation, and you'll forgive me if I don't remember the presenter's name, there steps were given And after the audit is conducted, you have a exit audit with the entity. The many years I've sat on this PSC, we have seen where in many times reports come from agencies or reports on agencies from the AG department to the PAC is simply because the officers or the entity has been unable to give a response to the satisfaction of your team. But interestingly, sometimes when they come to PAC, they suddenly come up with answers that we accept or are acceptable. Is there a process in place for them to really give you the answer that the team requires? And secondly, is there a process in place, and I'm probably addressing the Minister of Finance now, to ensure that the answer they give at your exit audit does not differ from the answer they give here when they come to the PAC? Because we have seen instances of that before, that the story changed completely as to the reason for that particular decision having been taken. I know it probably is outside of your remit, but I mean, these are questions that confront us every day, and Member Clark here also has the problem, you know? We see in your report that it is so, and when you ask questions, you get a different answer. How do we justify, how do we rationalize, how we get rid of this?
All right, so, Chair, I don't know if I have no control over what is said by members at a Public Accounts Committee hearing, but I can tell you the process that we have implemented in recognition of that same matter. Well, as you have correctly indicated, we have an exit interview, and at that exit interview, the auditee is made aware of the issues that are of relevance. Subsequently, a draft report is sent, and the entity is provided an opportunity to respond, and a time is generally given. More often than not, they request an extension of time, and that is also provided. So in the past, what we would do is, to having provided a response to the draft report, we would amend that report and resubmit to the entity to say that this is the draft report, this is our consideration, and this is what is going to be tabled, and they get another opportunity to respond. I have, since this year, or probably more late last year, introduced another level, and which is what we call the response matrix. Now, on that matrix, the audit finding is included. When the entity provides a response, we include the response on that matrix, and then we provide them with our comments to say whether, if we accept, we will say we accept, and we are going to accordingly adjust the report. If we do not accept, we state why we do not accept, and that we will not adjust the report. They're given another opportunity to provide information if they're able to. That matrix is signed off by all parties involved.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions? I want to go to AOB. Member Sibley, you still have more? I understand this is your profession. AOB?
I will yield my follow-up question, and I will take it to the AG outside for some clarification.
Okay.
But, Chair, I thought this was an orientation of PAC members, but I think what I got from the presentation is an insight of how the Auditor General's department works.
There is also, just for information, I don't know if you participated in the online session last week, but there are some documents circulated in the email for this meeting, which gives you an insight into the PAC. It was prepared by our committee clerk. These documents, which are in your folder, so...
Yes, Chair, I saw them, but
okay.
Notwithstanding that the documents are in the folder, I just thought that based on the agenda that we were going to have an orientation for PAC members, but be it as it may, I allow you to go to AOB, Chair.
If there is a need, Member Siblings, I can speak to the committee clerk in terms of the procedures. But I think you are well aware how the PAC works. We receive reports from the Auditor General. Well, the Auditor General tables reports in Parliament, and we examine them. We make recommendations and about the issues that arise and the corrective actions that we believe should be taken to deal with the issues that arise. But AG, you wanted to respond?
But Mr. Chairman, I know that an orientation session was held for the PAC members last week.
Right.
Members of my department actually participated, 2 members at the AGs. And so this presentation was deliberately, I did not want to repeat. I'm told that Mrs. Douglas Beckford presented last week, and I'm told that she did a thorough presentation, and she actually presented on matters for the AUGD. So I was very deliberate because I thought all members of Parliament, that's what I was told, participated in that.
Not all participated,
okay.
But the session, Member Siblings,
yes.
we went through most of what is in the actual folder. So I deliberately didn't want to do it because I felt, one, we had done it, we had circulated it, and I didn't think it was the best use of the time of members to repeat that. But it was an online session. I actually chaired it, and persons were able to ask questions on the PAC process. Member Wilson?
Yes, Chair, thank you. It's my first time reviewing this, and, well, good presentation, by the way. I would want to say congratulations to you both. I think what you're doing is spectacular. Information risk management is critical. And I also think having a system that looks at the performance of audits is also a very good thing in line with the digital age that we are now in. But I'm still not clear, AG, on what you substantiate as being material to trigger audit. That was not clear at all. Member Sibbles, my colleague, tried to interrogate that matter. It didn't come up. I am aware, and I heard you said, and in the presentation, that it should be done, an audit should be done by all agencies and ministries yearly. Well, we are unable to do that. But in my head, I'm thinking, would it be a situation where an audit is continually triggered in certain ministries, departments, and agencies, and not in others? So I want to know how you guys come about determining what is material. If there's one thing I want to get from this is how do you go about determining, because we have so many agencies, how do you know this one we should be auditing this year and that one next year? And do you have a roster of the agencies?
Thanks for that question. What we did not have on the slide is the resource allocation, which I believe it may have been shown last week. 50% of the department's resources is allocated to what I call statutory audits. So there are audits that I have no control over. I cannot determine whether I do them or not. It's statutorily, they are required. That is the audit of the appropriation accounts for the ministries, departments, and agencies, and the compliance audits that go with that, and the financial statements audits for a myriad of public sector entities that the Auditor General by statute is required to do. So the other 50% is now divided among the other audit streams that was shared this morning. And how then do we determine that? A number of factors. we look at the budgetary allocation, the contribution. Two anchors for us of, in the last 5 years or so is the National Development Plan, Vision 2030, and the Sustainable Development Goals. And how so we consider the ministries, departments, and agencies and their activities and how they contribute to the achievement of the National Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals. Other criteria used would be what is happening in the general atmosphere, what is of interest to the public. There are also other audits, the special audit investigations. These audits are done on demand. So these are not audits that we generally make a determination to say we're going to look at this entity. For example, CMU. CMU was an audit that was requested. A number of these audits, once you see special audits, it's because they are requested. Under the law, a member of parliament can request an audit, and the general public can request an audit. In fact, I have a log of audits to be conducted based on request from members. So those are, so it's not that I determine that I am going to go and see I'm just going over here to do an audit. Many of these special audits are requested, and we do them based on demand and as the resources become available. The performance audits, as we tend to call it, is a study. We tend to get a little bit more complex. We may even do what we call a preliminary survey, where we go out in the audit field and do an assessment of the subject matter to determine, do we actually undertake this audit? And there are times that we have had focus group discussions to determine, if we look at an entity, what value can we add? Because at the end of the day, every audit that is undertaken, we must be convinced that we are adding value to the process. Is that clearer, member?
All right, go ahead.
Somewhat in that the remaining amount, I was interested to hear whether you had a matrix or some criteria that you would use to determine, rather than someone just write a letter and said, hey, I wanted to have a look
I would say, I would say, Member Wilson, to some extent, we have to trust the judgment of the professionals, meaning they may get 100 anonymous statements saying there are issues going on. I believe they would have to satisfy themselves that there's some veracity to what is being said before they go and allocate resources to a particular institution. So I think in cases you may have information coming from multiple sources, and the AG department makes a determination about the credibility of the information and the source, and then based on that determines whether it's an emergency audit or a special audit. But I think the professionals make that judgment over time based on their own experiences.
And I can add to what you're saying, Chair, because what I'm giving is a synopsis. I'm not doing a deep dive in the process. But yes, in fact, what we have now designed, we have a form that is completed for every complaint that we receive, and it goes through the rounds. So the person that is responsible for completing that form is also required to do a preliminary assessment to determine the veracity of what is being proffered, whatever complaint is being made. And we also determine whether I have the jurisdiction to do the audit, or should it be done by another entity, which is the intent then to forward it to another entity if it really does not fall within my remit. And it is at that point we make an assessment to say, yes, this is an audit that we should undertake, and it is added to the audit plan. So there is a process more elaborate than I'm sharing here. I'm just telling you briefly the process that it entailed. And everything that I say to you is documented elaborately. And I think my explanation may betray the depth of that process.
Member Miller.
Thank you, Sir Chair. AG, I know in the past I've served on many boards, and one in particular that I've chaired. I've had problem with that board in terms of the audit statement yearly. and we're cognizant of the fact of the limited resources that your department will have. I remember repeatedly that board wrote to your department to ask for one of the external auditors that your department prescribed that we can use. And on 3 occasions, that request was rejected. And also, it delayed the process of getting an audit report done. What are the criteria that you look at in terms of approving for an agency or a department to get audited, seeking the request for an external agency?
Thank you. No, I don't know which agency that is specifically, and I'm sure if I know which agencies it's specifically, I know the reason why the request was rejected. But there are a number of things that we take into consideration. And if it's an executive agency, the executive agencies are required to, at the end of the financial year, and if it's an executive agency, you'd be aware, to submit 50% of their earnings to the consolidated fund. But in addition to that, the executive agencies are also required to prepare an appropriation account. Private audit firms do not audit appropriation accounts. In fact, it is a challenge that I think will emerge probably for other agencies that are required to do appropriation accounts. And some executive agencies are riskier than some. In fact, I do have a table that is prepared where we rank the entities based on, when I say risk, the complexity and the issues that are known to us with that agency. And just to give an example, so there are some entities that that have outsourced. SDC would have been one, and there's another that I outsourced. When we outsource these audits, I still retain the responsibility, because under the FAA Act, I have to retain the responsibility for sign-off of some of these audits. And so when I'm outsourcing, I have to take that into consideration, and the audit fees are high. So we have to manage the audit fees. Now, I know that an audit can only be undertaken if the information is available. Some entities probably will feel that they will get greater support if an external auditor comes in to do that audit. But that is when you see the fees increase exponentially, because I know the records are not available, or what is available is not correct. And when the auditor has to stay in the field, it doesn't happen because we don't charge like that. And I don't think the entities initially have a full understanding and appreciation for how audit fees can increase. They have to have, if I am aware that an entity has all the records available and the risk and complexity, and when I say the complexity, I'm not speaking about the accounts itself, because audit firms are quite capable of undertaking the challenges of the entities, but there are some entities, because of the absence of the information and the other agencies of government that they interconnect with and you have to get information from, that presents a challenge to external auditors to gain access to that information. And on that basis, I will say no. For some entities where I've said no, once they are in a state that I believe an external auditor can go in and conduct that audit without having severe implication for the budget, I give the approval. And in fact, I have been doing that in recent times.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? All right, let's go to item 8, date of next meeting. I'm proposing that we meet on January 12th, 2021, which would be the second Tuesday in January, and we would begin with the Heart Trust NTA. So we would need to indicate that to the agency. And we'll recirculate the reports. They are on the website and also on the Google Drive. Member Chin, you want to move for the adjournment? Any other business? Yes.
Same time, Sir Chair.
10 o'clock. And I would say to members, given the workload that we have, please budget Tuesday mornings at 10, certainly for the in the new year. Don't make other plans for us to meet Tuesdays at 10 going forward, because we have a number of reports that we need to get through. All right? Thank you. Member Chin, you'll move?
So move.
Seconded by Member Miller. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
We remain resilient in our fight against known and unknown threats to our country. We are never daunted.
We are committed to continuously deliver effective and efficient service when we save lives and protect property.
And we continue to reassure with courtesy, integrity, and respect for the rights of all.
We are building
forward
together.
Jamaica.